Good morning, everyone. It's such an honor to kick off today's inspiring lineup of amazing speakers sharing these beautiful poetic topics by speaking about plastic garbage. I'm going to start off with a story of something that happened to me 10 years ago, which, looking back on it, I had no idea at the time how prophetic or how strangely fitting it would be. I've always loved the ocean, growing up near the ocean, and as many of us do, I looked for solace and peace going for long walks or playing in the surf as a kid. In my 20s, I lived in Monterey for graduate school, studying environmental policy, and I decided to get scuba certified. So after several weeks in the nice, warm indoor pool, we had our first open water dive in the frigid waters of the Monterey Bay, and I found myself 30 feet down, and all of a sudden I couldn't breathe. I was sucking on my regulator, nothing. So I resisted every impulse to bolt for the surface and instead waved to the instructor to come over and help out. So we shared oxygen back and forth while he looked for the problem, and then signaled me to the surface. Showed me the offender, a tiny piece of plastic film had gotten stuck in my regulator. Which, looking back on it, is almost uncanny. I've spent the last 4 years traipsing around the world chasing plastic garbage, working to raise awareness about how our marine ecosystems in our ocean are choking on plastic. 10 years later, I've had a chance to sail 20,000 miles across 5 oceans, documenting a thin veneer of plastic pollution covering 2/3 of the Earth's surface. So looking back on that day, I think the ocean was trying to tell me something. In that same year, in 2001, we call it the year of the regulator, I met a man named Captain Charles Moore who had sailed through an area of the Pacific Ocean that's now called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. I was haunted by this and resolved to get involved and kept in touch with him back and forth until in 2008, I was invited on a research trip that would change my life forever, crossing through the same area of the ocean with 5 other sailors, all male. That would turn out to be a part of the story later. And what we were doing was sailing through this area from Hawaii back to Los Angeles, 4,000 miles at sea, through this oceanic current system called the North Pacific Gyre. It's like a massive whirlpool in the ocean in which floating plastic garbage from North America and Asia, Mexico, Canada is winding up accumulating. Now, just to give you an idea of how this travels, one single plastic bottle with a cap still on can make its way from California all the way to Japan and back in roughly 6 to 10 years. Now, plastic is non-biodegradable, but it does break down in UV light. So as it's making that journey, it breaks into smaller and smaller particles that can wreak havoc on marine ecosystems. So what happens when all the garbage that we see lining our streets, from the Arroyo Seco to the LA River to Ballona Creek, makes its way into these currents? Just a few moments ago before this talk, I grabbed a small plastic bottle from the campus grounds here. We've all seen it littering our streets, and when it makes its way into these currents, it breaks down into these particles that are now devastating to marine wildlife. So here's a few examples. See, I knew I would have trouble with this. There we go. Here's one classic example. This is Mae West, a common snapping turtle that as a baby got trapped in a small plastic ring. Now this plastic is so durable, it's made from petroleum, it's non-biodegradable, literally designed to last forever. But we make products from it that are designed to be thrown away. And this is one of thousands and thousands of examples like this. Now when I first learned about this issue in 2001, I badgered Captain Moore until he finally invited me on a short research trip to Guadalupe Island off the coast of Baja California. We collected 30 stomach samples from these birds, these Laysan albatross, and every single one of them had plastic in it. This is not an uncommon sight in places like Guadalupe Island or Midway, where Marcus got his start in this issue. In fact, every single piece of trash you see here, from lighters to shotgun shells to a toothbrush to an action figure leg, Marcus pulled out of the stomachs of birds on Midway Island. Oops, here's another example. This is a gray whale that washed up last spring in Seattle with 20 plastic bags in its stomachs. So back to that trip in 2008, I expected to go out to this area and see an island of garbage the size of Texas. I was really surprised to see instead a beautiful blue pristine ocean until we pulled up these samples using this device that skims the ocean surface with a fine mesh net. And every single sample we collected looked like this. Our ocean is turning into a plastic soup. Now something else that we saw on this trip that was even more alarming was new evidence of plastic getting into the food chain that you and I depend on. We collected 671 of these small lanternfish that are food for tuna and mahi-mahi and squid, and we found 35% had plastics in their stomachs. Now, another organization has since done a study on these same fish, finding 9% had plastic in their stomachs. So in less than 100 years, we have trashed our oceans to the point that the fish that feed the fish that you and I eat are now ingesting plastics. Something else profoundly life-changing happened for me on this voyage that I alluded to earlier. I was up in the sail one day when the lead researcher, Dr. Marcus Eriksen, found me up there with a small blue ring he had knitted out of plastic trash floating on the ocean surface. He proposed, and I said yes. Our lives were now literally bound romantically and professionally by trash. There was one condition, though. Before we started our wedding planning, we were going to build a boat, an ocean-going raft, out of 15,000 plastic bottles, 24 sailboat masts we got from junked boats, a Cessna 310 from a junkyard. We tied the whole thing together with our friend Joel, and we more or less had an ocean-going raft called Jump 2.5 months later. So the idea was to shock people into paying attention to this research. I would stay on land. My parents would have had his head had I been on this trip. And Marcus and Joel sailed in what we thought would be a 6-week journey from California through the garbage patch out to Hawaii. Well, we had a few shocks ourselves, one of which was the voyage took 3 months, not 6 weeks. The second was when they caught one of very few fish that they caught on this journey, running very, very low on food because it took so long. Marcus cut open the stomach of one of our fish and found 17 pieces of plastic inside the stomach of this fish that he had been planning to eat. This one he didn't eat, because what we know about plastic pollution in the ocean, each particle of plastic acts like a sponge for chemicals, persistent organic pollutants, like PCBs and DDT, and pesticides and oil drops from our cars stick to these plastic particles because of the chemistry of these particles and of the seawater. Now, I was curious, as we were a young couple thinking about family someday, are those chemicals from plastic getting into the food chain and into our bodies? So we did a blood test and found trace levels in my own blood serum of those same chemicals that stick to plastic. So as someone who is thinking about a family someday, I know that these chemicals will pass on to the next generation. And this is not the kind of world I want to live in, where corporate greed is now resulting in chemicals stored in our own bodies. So a few weeks after this photo was taken, we got married on a bicycle tour from Vancouver to Mexico. And using our wedding money, we decided we were going to start our own organization to try and document this problem, to bring it to a wider audience, and to think of some better solutions.
So what we saw was that there were some gaps in the research. We understood now that there was this plastic soup in the North Pacific Gyre, and it was impacting marine organisms, including fish that feed the fish we harvest to feed the world. One of the big data gaps were what's happening outside the North Pacific. Here's a colleague of ours, Nikolai Maximenko. He created this map showing the 5 hotspots, the accumulation zones where the currents kind of slow down and debris might accumulate. But no one had been in these other areas to look for plastic. So we began our first expedition. Our 5 Gyres Institute was to go visit the 5 gyres. Our first was in North Atlantic, beginning in St. Thomas up to Bermuda, right through the ascent of the accumulation zone and onward to the Azores. We began to see the exact same stuff that we saw in the North Pacific, that broken down, fragmented confetti of plastics, of all kinds of plastics, cups and cup lids and forks and knives and buckets and crates, all broken into smaller particles. When we got to the Azores, we saw a similar sight. Like from the Hawaiian Islands, Bermuda, St. Thomas, and the Azores are awash with trash. Now we have one colleague, Carol Lavender-Law, who's done work in the North Atlantic for 20 years, and she was studying plastic. She saw no increase in the amount of plastic in the ocean over 20 years, even though we know more is going in. One thought is that islands in the gyres are acting as a natural net, absorbing our trash. So that bottle cap that might leave here in Pasadena, California, may go on a very long journey, washing up on some island in one of the gyres. So without the Atlantic, and before we can unpack our bags, we got a call from the Stad Amsterdam, this ship. Now, we didn't unpack our bags at all. We hopped on this boat very quickly. They invited us to come along and cross the Indian Ocean Gyre. Now, they gave us, it was an amazing trip. we were told how to sail the ship, how to man the sails, and how to climb the mast. Actually gave us rigging, let us like monkeys climb about the ship. The best place to hang out was on the bow. Hang out here, you can watch the dolphins go by. And we did this for about 3 weeks, going from Perth, Australia, all the way to Mauritius, touching the edge of the Indian Ocean gyre, that accumulation zone. Begin to find the same thing. Once again, that broken down, fragmented plastic, among a few recognizable items, but those fragments, we have no idea what product they were. So then we went back home, then back to Rio de Janeiro a few months later, chartered a vessel called the Sea Dragon, and made 3 trips across the South Atlantic. Leg 1 to Ascension Island near the equator, and then back to Rio, to Cape Town to Namibia, down to Uruguay. A nice good sample set right through that accumulation zone. We found the same thing. Once again, this technicolor confetti of what once was things you might see here on land, you might use every day, like the bottles and the bags and things of that sort. I remember when we collected this sample and a few others around, right in the heart of the gyre. We saw a whale surface maybe 200 feet from our boat, right off the starboard bow. It came up, we saw it was a minke whale, had a very definitive dorsal fin. And it was bittersweet because they are baleen whales. They open their mouths wide and they consume massive gulps of water to feed. So blindly, they just grab the sea surface and eat that. And we knew that what they're getting today is more plastic than nutritive material. And this is in the middle of nowhere, as far from land as you can get on the planet today. We met the Sea Dragon again as we rounded the Cape up to Valdivia, Chile. We had a 5,000-mile trek from Chile to Tahiti with a stop off on Easter Island. And that took us right through the accumulation zone of this gyre, the last of the 5 gyres. And once again, that confetti of plastic waste. When we got to Easter Island, we noticed the entire island rim, much like other islands everywhere else in the world we have been to, has this ring of plastic. It's almost like the soap scum you might see in a bathtub as it drains. We have done the same thing to every island in the gyres around the world in just 50 short years since the advent of domestically available plastics. So we've been to all 5 gyres. We've discovered 7 garbage patches in these gyres. There's 1 garbage patch we haven't been to yet, and that's the western half of the North Pacific Gyre near Japan. So what's coming up next is go from Kwajalein Atoll to Japan, to the western garbage patch, and then cut across right through the Japan tsunami debris field and see what is there, how much is there, and what's going to make landfall in the next year. Who's responsible? How do we clean this up? Who caused this? How do we hold them responsible? Well, if you consider an oil spill, for example, these things happen very quickly. They're dramatic events, and you can point to a company. You can say, in this case, BP. They're responsible. You can point to a country having national waters. You can point to the United States and say, clean this up. And we can, to some degree, rest assured knowing that raw petroleum is biodegradable in a time scale that makes sense to us. Plastic is an oil spill. It's much more insidious. The gyres are in international waters. No one takes responsibility. Those fragments, that multicolored confetti, you can't point to a company. You can't identify the product in most cases. And plastic is bonded into a polymer. It does not degrade in any time scale that makes sense to us. It is the greatest oil spill in the history of life on Earth, and it's happening now, increasing every day. So what is the status quo? It's a trashed world. In just 50 short years, we've created this global mess where we burn, we bury, we export our trash overseas, or we watch it wash down our watersheds out into the gyres. There are solutions. There are many solutions. There is no one silver bullet. There are as many solutions as there are people. Every community can do something different based on their socioeconomic status and their level of development. Some things that work great new design. There's no reason why we should use the material that we invented to last forever to make a product that we throw away. Energy, waste energy is getting much more efficient and cleaner. Biopolymers, we can actually make plastic, not the ones out of corn you might see, but out of bacteria that have a half-life at 18 months in the ocean, that actually realistically degrade in the sea. Globalizing ideas and not stuff. Globalizing ideas, the Arab Spring, the future of the internet. These are ways we're globalizing ideas. Plastic is the lubrication of globalization, of getting stuff out there, and it's not working for us. Legislation. I mean, a lot of people that don't like regulation of anything. Well, we like regulation of keeping seatbelts in cars and lead out of paint. We need to regulate this plastics issue. Once again, to make a product out of a material that lasts forever and then throw it away is immoral. And this is immoral. How do we solve this for the people that make up the majority of the population of the world, the poorest of the poor? When Ann and I sailed from Rio de Janeiro to South Africa, in South Africa, we took a township tour to see some of the poorest Africans on the continent. When we saw as people, there was one building we went to, one home, there were 18 families sharing one sink, one toilet. You walk outside, there are plastic bags and the barbed wire fences. The ground was like autumn leaves littered with candy wrappers and bottle caps and cup lids and forks and knives. Even at that level of poverty, plastic had no value. So these other solutions I mentioned, the legislation, the biopolymers, the waste energy, might not work for the billions of people that live in the world's landfills. We can't keep treating our trash like trash, or people the same way. So what works? What could work? One thing we've done, we have found a way to turn that kind of trash we find littering beaches and communities around the world into something useful. We've created a solar oven that can, in a non-toxic way, turn polyethylene and polypropylene scraps washed ashore into functional building materials, into bricks. For example, here's a frisbee I made in my mother-in-law's oven just last week, taking bottle caps we found on Easter Island, Bermuda, Hawaii, and Mauritius, all to make a product that's useful. There is no room for waste as a concept or a place in the world today. Thank you.